All right, so what we're going to talk about today with Centennial Scholars is um, we're going to talk about scams and how, so kind of some common ones, how you can spot some red flags, and then also some things that we do here at Centennial, some steps we take to try to help keep everyone safe. So I'm going to share my screen here and go into this PowerPoint. We'll talk about what we're going to talk about. So if you have questions as we go along, there's a couple ways you can get to me. There should be a way to raise your hand. There should be a chat feature. Any of those would work. Or you can unmute yourself and ask a question also if you get to that point and I'm not noticing your question or something along those lines. So that's how we'll handle questions. And then if there's any afterwards, you can email me or call me or whatever. I think talking about scams is a big deal because it's nice to kind of cover that ground. And I don't think it's important just for an individual person, but it's important information to know for friends and family. And if somebody says, hey, I got this email or this call, it's good to know, if that information is on the up and up, and try to help your friends and family figure out if the information coming to you is legit or if it's fake. So this is basically what we're going to cover, and each section is going to have some big lessons or some big teachings and some smaller things also. But they'll basically work the same way, where we talk about what it is, some examples maybe, and then what to look out for. But first, we have to talk about the basics. And to me, financial scams basically boil down into two different kind of scams. One is immediate cash, and the other is looking for information or data. In the end, like anything else, it's all about the money. But it's how the scammer gets money that differentiates these two. So for a cash type, they're just looking directly for cash, for money from you, either in the form of cash or gift cards have gotten to be a big thing, something like that. For information or for data, they may not be the one that directly uses your information. They may sell the information to a third party, get their money that way, and then somebody else is the one that would take advantage of what they've learned. So there's a lot of similarities, but they are a little different in how they're executed, and like I said, who makes the money and how. But the red flags are going to be pretty similar, so we can kind of lump them together as we talk through these things. So the first one we're going to talk about is a Ponzi scheme, and it's named after Charles Ponzi. Around 1920, he swindled U.S. investors, basically people in Boston, out of 20 million, which is about 250 million in today's dollars. And what in theory he was doing was taking international reply coupons, which were basically stamps for sending international mail. And he was claiming that he could buy them cheaper in Italy, bring them to the US, sell them in the US, make some money, and then that's where the return would be. So he was claiming gigantic returns. It didn't last very long. It was only a 6-month scam, but because of the size and the popularity, and quite honestly, because it was in Boston around the time when news organizations were getting big and newspapers were huge, because of that, the scams got named after him. This actually wasn't even the first scam of its kind that he was involved in. He was part of a bank in Montreal that worked on a similar worked in a similar fashion, but he wasn't in charge of it. He was just one of the guys there, but saw how it worked. The person who ran that bank took all the money and fled to Mexico before they caught him. But he was able to see how it all worked and work that through, and then start his scam several years later that, like I said, cost a lot of money for a lot of people, basically in Boston. So how does it work? Usually what happens is the early investor is promised returns that are outlandish. They don't make a lot of sense. They're great. And then as it goes on, the money deposited is used to pay off the earlier investors. And then the operator, the person running the scam, takes their cut off the top as well. Problem is, when the money coming in doesn't match the flow of money going out, that's when the whole thing collapses. So that can be one of two ways. That can be the early money in makes a run on the scam and pulls all their money out, or there just aren't enough new people coming in to provide the money to support the early investors. But either way, when the new money coming in doesn't equal the old money going out, then it all falls apart. And what we see often is these actually start as a legitimate investment. In Ponzi's case, it wasn't, but often it starts as a legitimate investment, and the person running it has a loss and says, well, I'll make it up later, and we'll still report good numbers, and we'll just make it up. And as it goes and goes and goes, you reach a point where you can't make that up anymore, and it goes from being, an honest to goodness investment to a scam that falls apart and just isn't going to work. So some of the red flags that we tell people to look for: promising unreasonably high returns. So, if in the case of Ponzi, when the banks were paying 5% interest and he was promising 500% returns in 6 months, that kind of stuff, the basic rule is if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. If you see the word guarantee, run for the hills. If there's no transparency, or it's kind of an overly complex structure and you get a lot of, well, I'd explain it to you, but it's really hard, or I don't want anybody to know because it's mine, and then they'd copy it. Those kind of things are warnings. They're not always the case that those are the sign of a scam, but it should be enough to raise a red flag for you. And then lack of controls. We'll talk about Bernie Madoff in a minute, but one of the biggest issues with him was his accountant was basically in on it, and there weren't any controls. And so there was nobody checking to make sure everything legit. Basically, the foxes were guarding the hen house. So the next kind of scam we're going to talk about is they're called affinity scams. And it's usually an investment that's presented as being available to just a select group of people. So members of the same church, or we'll see social clubs or country clubs, something like that. And usually it's an affinity scam that is a Ponzi scheme, but only for this select group of people. And we see these pretty commonly in West Michigan. It's probably because of the close-knit churches that we see around. And you'll have people that, this is only for the good God-fearing people of this congregation. I don't want it to get too big. I don't want it to get out there. So those scams are called affinity scams. And the most famous of those is Bernie Madoff. He took people for more than $8 billion. And it was to the point with him where people were joining his synagogue or his country club just for the chance to meet him, so that they might have the privilege of having their money managed by him, not knowing that it was a scam all along. And I mean, if you look at some of the long-term ramifications for his scam, it's affected countless charities and retirement plans, and even the Wilpon family, who owned the Mets until last year. They were investors of his. They were taking money all along. So even though they made money, they had to pay back some of their gains that they'd made, and so it caused big problems for them and their family. And I mean, that's been going on for years now, and it's still having ramifications. So some of the red flags for affinity schemes, basically the same as the Ponzi schemes, promising returns that are too big, or guarantees, things like that. But also on the affinity side, it's a little more secretive, where in a Ponzi scheme, they're always looking for new people and they're trying to equal out those flows. For an affinity scheme, they make it seem like it's secretive. It's only for this select group. It's only for these people we really care about. And so they don't want anybody to talk to anybody else outside of the group about the investment opportunity. And they start limiting that investor pool. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a scam, but it is something that should raise a red flag and cause you to ask some questions. So the next kind of scam is, I call it an intimidation scam. So it involves a threat. And the idea is to scare you, to cause an emotional response, so you react without really thinking. And so this is looking for money. Gift cards, like I said, have become a big thing, or information for identity theft, your social security number or bank account number, something like that. And so a real life example that happened to me was, it was a Friday. There was a call on the answering machine at home from the IRS informing me that they were going to file suit on Monday unless I called back and worked out something with one of their people. And I had to talk to somebody there, and they needed information from me, and I owed them money, and all of those kind of things. And like I said, the whole idea is to provoke an emotional response, and something where you go, oh geez, I don't want to get in trouble. I better call them and straighten this out. Oftentimes they'll say, we've been trying to get a hold of you. This is your last chance, that kind of thing, to really push the emotional envelope even further. Now, of course, that was a scam. The IRS, the Social Security Administration, they're not going to call you. They're not going to email you. They work through the U.S. Postal Service. They work through snail mail. That's how they communicate. So if there's a call from one of those organizations, unless you have called them and they're calling you back directly, you know that that's a scam, and you can ignore those messages, get rid of them. But other ways to protect yourself: never give out your social security number or a bank account number, something like that, over the phone for somebody like that who calls you. There certainly are situations where you may call somebody to do some sort of, order where you need to read off a credit card number or something like that. That's a different story. But if somebody calls you, never read off that information. They should have it already. They may ask you to confirm a couple digits, but not the entire number. And then if you're concerned or just have that little tickle in the back of your head that maybe something's not quite right, look up the number independently. If it doesn't match, then I would be very cautious. That particular scam that I was talking about, where the call came to me, one of the things they said was, call us back on our toll-free number. And then I actually looked it up. It was the zip code, or the area code for Cincinnati, Ohio. But it was the area code, not an 800 or 888 toll-free number. So, and beyond the fact that I knew that they wouldn't call, you also have the fact that this information doesn't match up with how things actually work. Urgency works somewhat similarly to intimidation, but it's usually more of um, a technology scam. It's the same kind of thing, trying to force a quick emotional response. But on the urgency side of things, from the scammer's point of view, this can involve a lot of planning and observation to get to the right point where they can impact you emotionally and know enough information about you to be able to do it. And I'll get into an example here in just a second. And like I said, it's especially big in technology. Tends to happen a lot if your email address gets hacked or something like that. So a real example that we saw here, and this was a few years ago, a hacker gained access to a client's emails, and we don't know when, but it was clearly for a while based on the information that the hacker knew. And they just basically lurked. They sat and observed and didn't really do anything until there was an opportunity for them. Our client was heading out of the country on vacation. They were able to see this obviously from the emails and then the communication that had gone back and forth between the client and the advisor. So the hacker waited until this person was out of the country and then said, "Hey, I'm out of the country. I ran into this big problem. I need you to wire this much money to this account so I can take care of this problem right away." I think it was, I got my wallet stolen and they took my passport and all that kind of stuff. So luckily for us, our procedures that we have in place kept this from being an issue where we sent money out to this particular scammer. But this is not a unique scam. We've heard about it from many places. And it, like I said, it involves a lot of planning, a lot of waiting, and then acting quickly, trying to get that response, trying to get that money quickly before somebody starts to ask some questions about how realistic is this, and trying to get you to do things without having the proper procedures followed. So again, the kind of emergency immediacy always raises a red flag for us that we start to question, okay, is this really legit? But on our side of things, we have to speak to you to send money to you. Now, that doesn't mean if we have a regularly set up distribution schedule, that money goes out, we've already talked to you, we've set that up, it goes to the same place at the same time. This is for money that would be different, that you would request on a special kind of one-off situation. We can't send that money out without speaking to the client. And from my standpoint, one of the advantages of us being a small firm is we know who our clients are. So we know what you talk like, what you sound like. We can ask questions if we're not quite sure that you are who you say you are, where we'll have answers that maybe this hacker wouldn't have. So I think being a small firm and having these procedures in place, we tend to be fairly well protected. A type of scam that it's actually several things that kind of get lumped together. They're called senior scams, and they're more popular than ever. And there's several reasons why. I mean, obviously, over the last year, with people being more isolated because of COVID, you have a group of people that are just looking for some sort of human connection and somebody to talk to. And so they're vulnerable in that regard. It's the baby boomers getting older, it's a growing population, and they happen to control a massive amount of wealth as well. Stereotypically, they're more trusting of people, and so maybe not as suspicious of motives and of what's going on. Me personally, as a Gen Xer, we were suspicious of everything. So maybe it won't happen as much when my group gets to be senior citizens. Technological immigrants is, you've been around technology, but it's not something you were born with. It wasn't there from the beginning. So you're kind of learning as you go. And so there are some new technological bells and whistles maybe that you wouldn't be used to as a senior, and they can take advantage of that as well. And then there certainly is a piece of the senior population that is vulnerable either mentally or physically, but still has money, and so therefore can be taken advantage of, unfortunately. And again, unfortunately, one of the biggest areas of this is people that are supposed to help. So caregivers, maybe family friends who are just helping out, that kind of thing. And they'll do it by, forging signatures or forcing them to sign a document that they don't understand or that they wouldn't sign under normal circumstances, but you've got this other person forcing you to do it. Maybe they're promising to take care of someone and not delivering on those promises, but still taking the money, or just flat out outright theft. There was $20 left on the counter and I'm going to put it in my pocket. There's many, many more examples of this, but like I said, frequently that's what we see is those that are supposed to be the helpers are some of the biggest perpetrators of this kind of scam. So what are some other frauds that are directly aimed at senior citizens? One is called the grandparent call, where you get a kind of garbled call from a grandchild who's on spring break or on vacation or here or there and got in trouble, and they don't want mom and dad to know, but they could really use $5,000 or $10,000 to get out of this sticky situation. There's it's called sweepstakes or lottery, where you won a cash prize in some lottery in this place or this country. But to claim the prize, we need the tax money up front. So you got to send us the money so we can send you your winnings. A sweetheart or new best friend, and we unfortunately have seen this here, where you have someone who's elderly and they pick up a new boyfriend or girlfriend who may be much younger. They know this older person has money, and so they're going to become their new boyfriend or girlfriend to take advantage of them and hopefully get written into the will and be able to make some money that way too. Social Security frauds are huge in the senior population because there are so many seniors that have to make ends meet based on their Social Security check. And so if you say there is something wrong with that check, it immediately puts them in panic mode. And so that unfortunately is a way that people are taken advantage of often. Jury duty scam is, hey, you've been selected for jury duty, but if you pay us this much money, we'll make sure you don't actually have to come in and do it. Home improvements. So, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but you've got these leaks all over the place, or your roof looks terrible, or this, and pay my company and we'll come fix it for you. And they either do a lousy job or they never show up at all. That kind of goes in with unnecessary services. It's the same kind of thing. And then we talked a little bit about caregivers and helpers. That, again, is probably the biggest piece. It's hard to say because a lot of that never gets reported, but it is out there and it is a problem. So what can you do to protect yourself? Going back to the lottery scam, don't pay to collect winnings. And if you didn't pay to enter, you're not going to win. So if you get that kind of notification, immediately hit delete. Caller IDs can be spoofed. So if you get, like I said, if you get a call from the Social Security Administration It's not really from the Social Security Administration, even if it says SSA on the caller ID. Don't send money to somebody you don't know. Don't deposit money for somebody you don't know, because that can cause different set of problems in different scams. Hold on to your own money. And then if you're in doubt, you should have a trusted third party that you can ask and say, hey, I got this solicitation or information. What do you think? Is it legit? Ask somebody you trust to help out. So a real example that we saw of a grandparent call, we had someone who got a call from their grandson. They were on spring break. They had a party at their hotel room and it got trashed, and the hotel proprietor doesn't want them to leave until they can pay $10,000 for the damages. They don't want mom and dad to know because they, for whatever the many reasons why you wouldn't want mom and dad to know what you were doing on spring break. So, call grandma to get the money. And in this case, every question that our client asked the grandson the response was another question. So, and it was a lot of, well, don't you remember we talked about this? Or, well, I thought you already knew that kind of thing, where it was really evasive. And the whole idea was to confuse this elderly person into saying, okay, well, I don't want my grandson in trouble, so I'm going to send the money to help out. Now, luckily, our client was able to see through that, but it happens quite often. And like I said, if you get somebody who's maybe a little more vulnerable, there can be a significant amount of money that would flow out the door trying to help their grandson, who's not their grandson, get out of trouble. One of the more popular technological scams at this point is phishing, which is an email scam. And so you get an email and it looks like a totally legitimate email from a company you would have heard of, Microsoft or Verizon or somebody along those lines that you would have heard from. And the idea is to have you click on the link to either give them information or so they can hack into your system. Now, when phishing first started, it was really easy to pick out the emails that were not legitimate. There'd be terrible spelling and grammatical errors. Logos would look different. The email addresses would look way off. But hackers have gotten more sophisticated. And so now they quite often look fairly legitimate. They'll use the same logos. They're better at duplicating kind of the US version of English. And so it looks legitimate. So this can become a big problem, obviously. And I'll show you what hover but don't click the link means in a minute, but that's really one of the best ways to try to counteract this, is to make sure you know where what you click on is going to lead you. Another thing too is if you bank with Comerica and you get a solicitation from Bank of America, you get a pretty good idea that that's not legitimate, and you can get rid of that right away. And then when in doubt, call the number you know to be legitimate. So if it's something from your local bank, call the bank itself, look the number up independently, call them yourself, and don't just take the number on the email as their number, the number you need. Look it up independently. So some examples of what phishing emails can look like. So in this example, you can see all the little bubbles there that kind of explain the various things to look for. So in the from line, it says it's from the University of North Texas, but that certainly doesn't look like an email address for somebody from the University of North Texas. Again, that sense of urgency and that sense of that sense of immediacy that you need to do this thing right away. We talked about hovering over the link, and I'll show you specifically what hovering over the link looks like on the next page. And then again, the fear and immediacy of, we've got to do this right away. It has to be done right now, or we're going to deactivate your account, something like that. They're trying to provoke an emotional response, so you'll move quickly before you really think about it. And as an example of hovering over the link, and this works on a desktop, a Windows application, but there are ways I'll talk about in a second to do it on tablets and smartphones and things like that. But if you look here, when this person put their cursor over what is supposed to be an email from Outlook to go in and update a security problem, the email address or the web address that pops up as where it's actually going to go is not a Microsoft address at all. So if you hover your mouse over something in an email, it will give you kind of a preview of the link of where it's going to send you. And if that is a mismatch, that is a big red flag as far as a phishing scam. So that works well if you're on a desktop or a laptop or something like that. But what about if you're on your iPad or if you're on an Android phone or something like that? So if you tap on that link, but don't just tap, put your finger and hold on an iPad, a preview pane will pop up to show you what that next window will look like. And so you can look and see what the address is and if it is actually taking you to, in this case, Microsoft, or if it's taking you someplace else. In my case, I have an Android phone, same kind of thing. If you tap and hold on that link, it will pop up at least the web address for where it would take you from that link, giving you a chance to see if that's a place you really want to go, or if that is a scam that you want to try to avoid. Now, obviously, there are millions and millions of scams out there, and I only ran through a small amount, but those are the ones we kind of see more commonly. Certainly, if there's a question that I didn't cover that you want to get into a little more in depth about, this probably isn't the best place to do that. So we can talk about it either via email or you can give me a call. But if anybody wants to ask any questions, now's a great time. Like I said, you can either kind of raise your hand and type it in the chat window, or you can unmute yourself and then ask away. All right, well, I don't have anything coming in, so I'm going to assume that means I covered everything perfectly and everybody's totally happy with what I said. Like I said, if you do have any questions, drop me an email, give me a call. Happy to talk through any questions you might have. Like I said at the start, I think this is really important, not just for you to know for yourself, but also for friends and family. So if you hear a story from somebody that you care about, you can help them understand that maybe what they are dealing with is not a legitimate thing. It's something they need to be quite concerned about. So that's about all I had. Have a great day. And like I said, if you have any questions, give me a call. Thank you.